Do 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 do. Extras.
This being the second last episode of the current series and ending in the middle of combat, it could be a bit of a lean extras, but I'll try my best. It can be tricky to keep things interesting for a long process that a character is super skilled at and needs to repeat 4 times. Plus, it's awkward when there's a lack of good ways to involve the other players. This is the kind of thing which is probably best simply assumed to succeed, or perhaps making just 1 or 2 rolls to see how well it goes, mostly in case they roll amazing or terrible results. My problem was that, although originally meant to be a much shorter term thing, curing the astral plague had become the culmination of such a long span of time, both in and out of game, that glossing over it would have made it feel like a big nothing we had left hanging forever. My solution was, at best, inelegant. It was mostly all Draven, with some saving throws for whoever was in the hot seat. Failing one of the 3 saves was some irrelevant damage. Failing a second save would have hurt a lot more, and probably prompted Draven to abort their procedure. Continuing would have risked some more severe consequences, but that was to be determined, because it seemed really unlikely, and I could always make the character pass out, then be sick, and sort out the details later. As Draven was rolling all his 40-plus Arcana, Spellcraft, and Use Magic Device checks, it would have been kind of silly to set the difficulty code high enough to add drama. That would be a lot like punishing him for building his character to be super good at something. So instead, the bulk of what was happening beneath the hood, assuming he didn't roll a 1, was determining how much energy the Outtro would have with which to summon stuff in the inevitable encounter. The better he rolled, against DCs which were challenging for his super skills, the fewer phantasms of past foes there would be to wear them down before the boss fight. And Draven was doing pretty well overall. Al's energy pool got a bit of a boost from that natural 1 on Angel, but when making so many rolls, at least one of those is expected. Then there was Draven's own turn in the chair. When I made up the Breastplate of the Master, it didn't have any specific use in mind. It was a great late-game armor for Draven, cool name, good stats, plus a creepy but interesting power. Its Dominate was hard to save against, which made it tempting, but leaving your own body unable to act made using it in combat feel scary, so I doubted it would get abused too much, and I gave it 2 uses because, once per day sucks. So when he brought it up as a solution to running the machine on himself, I thought, that was awesome. Should that additional complex magic interfere with the procedure? Probably, but I didn't want to penalize them for such a fun plan, not much anyway. When Draven's first roll on his own extraction was probably the highest skill check rolled in the whole campaign, I decided, okay, losing immortality is off the table now, which turned out to be a good thing for him, given that he did roll a 1 later, but since that was his second natural 1 on the whole astral extraction scene, it was right near the end, and since I'd already decided his immortality was safe, the only thing to do was to start the encounter now, not cure Draven, and basically ignore the whole energy die roll system and give Outtro maximum juice. Then I had to improvise how to describe what was actually going wrong. I stuck mostly with the not sure what's wrong sort of descriptions, pointing out some details, including that there was plenty of capacity left in the storage crystal, even more than expected, which is of course because the fragment of the Outtro was diverting some of that energy, keeping it for themselves so they could use it to smash the apparatus later. At this point, I simplified things a bit in the episode for clarity and also because it fit better with my visual metaphor of passing Draven's goggles back and forth to represent his consciousness. But what he actually did was drop the Dominate to see if he could learn anything from the different perspective of his own body, and also to hear if Midgard had any ideas. But then, when Andrew described the other presence, and Outtro began taunting, Draven used the second daily use of the breastplate to mind control his assistant again to activate the emergency shutdown and hit the remote release for his chair's bindings. He then canceled his control a second time to leap out of the chair and scramble to safety. And no, that was a different emergency shutdown than the one in the video. It's not that there were two different emergency shutdowns, or maybe they were different kinds, but whatever. The cover over the safety switch explanation is actually something I came up with while making the video. That's why it wasn't visible on earlier shots of the console. It would have been a real pain to go back and add it to all those shots. But it felt like a good in-universe explanation for the effects of the first and second natural ones. Also, as much as we all joked about something going wrong and leaving Draven's consciousness stranded, permanently stealing the target's body, there's no evidence that the Breastplate of the Master can function like the old magic jar spell. And it would be a much more powerful, much scarier item if it did work that way when the user's body died. But that didn't stop us from kidding about it. At least he'd be the same gender, assuming that's your preference. Different gender? That'd be a fun one to explain to your wife. It wouldn't be great either way, but yes, the female version would probably be even worse for Draven. Bonus, Andrew's younger than Draven.
Wait, if you took over Midgard, though, would you still have a claim to your title?
I mean, he'd have a claim to Midgard's baronial title. Nobody's stealing anyone's body, okay? So, Dr. Wiley's castle, that ancient Mega Man reference for what the kids now seem to refer to as a boss rush, felt like an excellent big battle to wrap up this phase of the campaign. At that point, I was planning a hiatus, but I did expect to go back to another phase, as opposed to the current 7-ish years and counting hiatus. The idea of making them fight their fears makes absolute sense for a nightmare entity like the Outtro, who could read their minds and recreate their most dangerous battles, the ones that nearly killed one or more heroes. And of course, it hilariously backfires because not only did each of these threats fail the first time, and the heroes are much, much more powerful now, but some of them the players had outright forgotten or didn't care about, and others were cathartic. So it has this great air of, oh no, what a devastating challenge, and yet they smash their way through it very satisfyingly, getting to show off how cool they all are now. Honestly, Lumberjack, Daggerface Trio, and even Beta and Mortival combined, at least up to the end of this video, may actually have consumed fewer party resources than what they spent fighting the Black Cloud, which I initially described as though it were unclear whether or not it could be damaged, but after the first couple attacks, I kept trying to state more and more obviously that there was no point in attacking it further without just meta-stating, guys, you've exhaustively proven that the evil cloud is immune to damage. So many high-level spells spent trying to find the storage crystal, which had definitely exploded. It will probably surprise nobody that, with all these enemies, Black strongly considered casting Blistering Radiance a couple times. One of the reasons Angel switched outfit to her Etarn aberration handling gear with its fire resistance. Of course, the 50-foot radius is so big that no matter where he centered it, it would basically hit the entire room, including all his allies, which is the main reason he didn't go that way.
Should I Blistering Radiance?
Do it! Just fucking do it! Come on! You know you want to. You've been wanting to cast that spell forever.
He would hit everything in the room, including you guys.
Yeah?
There's no cover from it. It spreads around obstacles.
Yeah?
There are only 2 targets, right? It's not worth it yet. Well, there's also something hidden in the obscuring mist. Instead of hitting everyone, I could drop a wall of fire.
Wall of fire!
Or I could summon the fist.
Oh yeah, fist this guy! Actually, yeah. Run the fist through him, try to crush everything inside.
The fist, which in rules terms is an elephant. Have an elephant trample through them.
Crush everything! Everything inside there!
So the fist materializes right out of the ceiling, or...?
I can't find the stats. I'll summon the fist later. I'll just cast Shout.
Is this what the Fate Matrix does? To paraphrase Duffman, Fate Matrix does a lot of things. Ooh yeah! This type of immediate, short-term, localized prediction of the future is not the purpose of the Fate Matrix, nor really its specialty, and to take that foresight and delegate it remotely to multiple targets elsewhere in the universe, that's not easy. That comes with costs, and it's not something they can do all the time. The obvious question might be, What would it have been like if they'd had enough warning to have Lord Kinokoro show up? What was he going to do? Look, to be honest, I'm not sure he'd have been better than the massive group buff for this particular battle. And maybe the Rajas knew that, and that's why he wasn't around, because I can say non-falsifiable shit like that about psychic divination masters. Frankly, Lord Kinokoro isn't quite a warrior of the caliber that, say, Little One has become, though he has a number of advantages to keep him in a similar league. 3.5 edition may have traded Rakshas's crazy magic immunities for spell resistance, but their SR of 27 means a fireball from a level 5 wizard basically cannot affect them. In fact, SR would negate even a level 17 caster's spells about half the time. And their damage reduction makes them very tough against even serious physical attacks, effectively immune to the pinpricks of ordinary beasts and soldiers. And, in addition to solid magical equipment, Lord Kinokoro has attuned himself to this combat use of the Fate Matrix, such that he virtually never goes into battle without that full +7 insight bonus to hit, damage, AC, saving throws, and skill checks, as well as harder-to-measure benefits of being able to see a short distance into his immediate future. It's probably a good thing that the Rajas don't seem interested in any kind of conquest, because they appear to be pretty capable of getting around the 3 planes, and while the nations that exist in this fantasy world generally survive because they have some kind of heroes or organizations or other protection against crazy shit, many individual cities would be virtually defenseless against a nigh-indestructible, magic-resistant, future-seeing shapeshifter of Kinokoro's power level. Of course, the only thing he has done that we actually know of, in even the vaguest terms, is saving a village of rat people into Shadowfell and helping them hide from Melissa's minions. The Rajas probably have quite a few irons in the fire, though, trying to outmaneuver their own enemies, the even more mysterious Mindhunters. And believe it or not, between this episode and the previous one, I cut out, like, half the Taco Bell jokes. So many Taco Bell passes right through you jokes. Which is always weird to me anyway, because I've eaten both severely spicy food and also Taco Bell many times, and neither gives me the kind of digestive issues people joke about. But anyway, I felt like I had to keep in a bunch of those jokes because we kept referencing it, but including any more would just, I don't know, feel like a gross pop culturization. Like, not that I don't like pop culture, but like the wrong kind of pop culture to immortalize further in my series that I care so much about. My amazing Patreon patrons get extras videos about a week early, giving them a chance to ask questions which I answer as best I can without spoilers, then read in silly voices for the public video on YouTube. Like these. Xylem asked, "What do the orcs in the desert eat? Are they purely hunters of fantasy creatures?" Hey, an orc lore dump sounds like fun. I'd say they get most of their calories from hunting fantasy creatures, migratory beasts like camels, dog-sized lizards, and horse-sized scorpions, which I class somewhere in between animal and fantasy monster, and sometimes other humanoids. Most of them hate hunting camels, because they see it as a sign of weakness. It's zero challenge for an orc, and a good chunk of them have a quasi-religious belief that the stronger the camel herds, the closer their lands are to recovering from the curse. But the orcs who survived this long were smart enough to value food over pride, or even hope. Other food sources, which they generally prefer over camels, include catching skittering beetles, about 3 to 12 inches long, and finding rodents' nests, both of which are tricky enough skills to make up for their less than impressive bounty. One aspect of desert orc life we may not spend as much time thinking about is food preservation. Now, they greatly prefer fresh food, and when they do take down something big, let alone colossal, their first move is to gorge themselves. But after that, they have developed a number of techniques for cooking and frying meat to extend its shelf life, which includes whatever IRL techniques make sense, because hell if I know, but also literally cooking meat on a dark shield in the noonday sun, and, in some cases, using actual blade magic fire maneuvers to barbecue. Hope you like well done. They also found ways of protecting and burying food in caches if there's too much to carry, such as sealing the jerky between 2 plates of scorpion carapace, if they plan to stay in the area for a few weeks. Note, orcs tend to refer to essentially any preserved food as jerky, regardless of what it actually is or what process was used. Related, the desert orc version of small talk is basically, "What's eatin'?" meaning, "What have you been eating?" And if the answer is an annoyed grunt, that generally means beetles, rats' nests, or camels, though many orcs will just say it because that's their nature, and some are quite proud of their beetle hunting skills. Obviously the answer you want to give is giant scorpion, or some crazy monster, but another answer which tends to be announced with pride is half rat, literally meaning half rat, which refers to the much vaunted, and surprisingly difficult if you haven't tried, skill of spotting a rodent in the open and hitting that small, typically distant and moving target with a throwing axe. Afrat is barely a snack, but it's a badge of honor and a bond of friendship because if you're not alone, you get to toss half the rat to your companion, sharing a meal and, often wordlessly, celebrating your axe throwing skill. A related orc term is flarat, or flat rat, which is what you get when you try to afrat with a throwing hammer. It is often used to describe an orc who is strong or skilled, but not the sharpest blade in the rack, because while a hammered rat is still calories, you're gonna get a mouthful of sand along with whatever's left of the animal. Xylem also asked,
regarding the line of toxic pools between Swain's and Cornell's territory, did you envision the wars between the vampire kings being similar in some ways to the World War I stalemate, where one side can make a breakthrough but is unable to follow up on it, allow another to concentrate forces and counterattack?
There's a definite World War I vibe, albeit spread over a vastly longer timescale. One gathers a powerful force, invades another, gets rebuffed because of significant home ground advantages. So they gather a huge, overwhelming force over decades or centuries, then invade and capture some area. But that leaves them open to counterattack, or invasion by one of the others. Then everybody spends a long period gradually clawing back their losses, usually ending up in something resembling the initial state, except that the whole thing is a 5-way, so it's a lot messier in practice. They also each go through long periods of it's just not worth it, where they mostly limit themselves to covert actions and consolidation, but it's always hard to tell those apart from the periods of building up a really big army this time that'll win for sure. Though, of course, the toxic pools were also just ripping off Tolkien's description of battlefields around Mordor.
Xylem also asked, how centralized is Vistria? Does it possess the true feudal vibe? For example, can individual lords engage in private wars without too much interference from the king?
Post-invasion Vistria is about as centralized as you can get without telecommunications, or at least where magical communications are rare enough not to affect day-to-day governance. Their feudalism is based more on administrative proximity and on tradition. The idea of one fiefdom attacking another overtly is almost unthinkable, or at least it was for a good 50 to 80 years, though perhaps that wartime solidarity may be waning, given that no human alive remembers the actual invasion of their neighbors. Prior to the fall of Verandi, and back to before the Shatter War, Vistria was more genuinely feudal. Stability increased and decreased through various periods, though open internal battles were still pretty uncommon, functioning on the understanding that as soon as the monarch learned about it, they'd probably tell you to knock it off, and then you'd have to justify your actions if you hoped to make permanent any gains, and not be punished with extremely subjective degrees of severity. You needed casus belli, with the monarch as ultimate arbiter, and most trade and border disputes were still resolved without raising armies. when things were really feudal was in the centuries after Smithian civilization expanded north from Verandi, when the lands were truly untamed, roads were a rare luxury, and for a long time, frost giants were a powerful presence on the Vistrian Peninsula. Not only was every lord much like a very small king trying to build and protect a town, or a fiefdom of several towns, but some of them found themselves in such a rough place that they were forced to pay tribute to local frost giant jarls, or, in rare cases, even allied with jarls or officially became their vassals, which led to some pretty nasty conflicts between humans, even when they should have been focused on the giants, bugbears, and other threats. And this is also why Vistrians from some northern regions, and descendants of certain noble families, still speak with frost giant accents. Leocro asked, "Why didn't they go for the door and prevent Al from cutting off their only means of escape?" Victory disease. The heroes are confident, and it's still pretty hard to override their assumption that whatever the situation is, they can handle it.
"I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me,"
is still their default point of view. 9 asked,
"If Lord Kinakoro is the Raja's warrior, how would he stack up against Unan or Du, or even all the Rajas put together?"
The Rajas are wise enough not to get in a confrontation with any ultimate monitors, and they're prescient enough they ought to be able to prevent such an unlikely thing from happening. Such an engagement would not resemble combat. 9 also asked,
"How have you been keeping track of the spirit seed's progression into a full spirit?"
I haven't. It's very subjective, although magical creatures, and especially a nascent spirit, can potentially do a lot of metaphysical growing without enlarging physically. It's really just a mental list of positive and negative events and influences, though. As Zed Banal asked, "So how exactly does this splinter of the Outtro work? Others have clearly escaped their clutches over time, so why didn't Al use those victims to establish an outpost? Or did they?" The shard leapt from the horseman's chain specifically into the white seed. That's what Al was after. The one thing that would make it worth even trying to establish a foothold in the Fadelands. The spirit seed has been growing within itself, shaped by so many incredible, powerful events and beings, but it hasn't been planted yet, hasn't emerged from its shell, so it's not too late to shape it. This personality shard is part of the Outtro, the same consciousness, but the same bargain that gave Al such immense power within their realm gives them very little power outside it. And the Headless Horseman is one of very few real agents which they control, which they can send out into the world. So it just all kind of came together. The seed from which to grow a new realm, minus the omnipotence, but better than nothing, and the energy of the astral plague which Draven's procedure would conveniently concentrate. If Outtro only had one night to send on missions, surely this was the best chance to accomplish something permanent. Trento01 asked, "You mentioned that the Outtro had a certain amount of energy to summon the various combatants. Did them recovering the seed change that, or was it just a moral victory for the party?" In terms of the battle, I didn't really change anything when they, very unexpectedly, rescued the seed. So more of a moral victory, I suppose, though if Outtro were to win the fight, it makes a big difference whether the seed is there or has somehow been moved beyond Al's grasp. Matthew McAfee and Martin Svalis Ortelius asked,
"What would Outtro do with the spirit seed if they win? What would it mean if they made an embassy in the Fadelands?"
If the Outtro defeats the party, step 1 would be to properly secure and infest a space, probably the lab, using whatever astral energy remains to terrify and kill any victims who wander in, trying to slowly expand control. Ideally, to get some metaphorical tendrils up into the city streets above to start feeding off the nightmares of New Vanover. Now, starting in the freaking Hand of Sirius stronghold isn't ideal, because if it takes so much energy to defeat the party, Al may not be able to fend off other priests or heroes who might swing by to cleanse the space. It's a hard place to set up a haunted house. Now, by default, this shard of the Outtro would only be able to gain energy from whatever suckers enter that space. Again, not an easy way to grow. They would have nothing like the omnipotence they possess within their realm. But if Al has the spirit seed, they could plant it and corrupt it, using that to establish a much stronger outpost. It would still take time, but instead of a slow, probably losing battle against the Hand, it would become a race against time for the Hand to stop Outtro from expanding control enough to reach the citizens, at which point Al would probably take over the entire Basilica, turning it into a fairly permanent, dark place where people disappear, even from nearby alleys. At that point, Al could try all kinds of mischief, like recruiting mortal agents in the Fadelands and, over the long term, send them on quests and try to find a way to convert this new stronghold into a true extension of their forest, an extension of the Hells. We might need a mid-level D&D campaign, or higher, looking for ways to defeat and ultimately purge the influence of the Dark Cathedral festering beneath the streets of New Vanover. Nick Slaughter asked, if the party had ignored the chromatic white deer before Ginneron, would the Cure the Plague story have been given priority? I imagine you all die of radiation poison would be an ignominious early end to the campaign. Because the two things were so far apart, several sessions at the beginning of the campaign, I don't really know if I would have not unleashed the Astral Plague, or if I'd have just done it all differently. It's one of those reasons it doesn't make a lot of sense to take what happened in the show and try to turn that into an adventure module, because like most homebrew games, so much of what happened was molded around what the players had already done, decisions all building on one another. And if the players or characters had been different, so many of those decisions would also have been different. Nick Slaughter also asked, what was your initial expectation for the method and timeline of curing the Astral Plague? I had not really planned that far ahead, clearly, but had vague notions of talk to some druids for help, do a little research, then maybe some kind of psionic or nature spirity quest in the jungles of Talaris or in the Feywild or something. I figured they'd deal with it in a span of 2 or 3 sessions when they got around to it, though not necessarily immediately given all the other plot hooks around. Obviously, whatever I came up with as a solution would inevitably create more plot hooks. Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin asked, will we ever see Daggerface again, or any of the old characters for TDDC 2? I still want to make DF videos, but that's its own thing. You won't see any of the main party characters of TDDC in the new series, though. The 2 campaigns' time frames overlap somewhat in universe, so I told the guys explicitly they wouldn't be messing with the other party. They go different places. Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin also asked, so how did you decide who to include in the fight? Obviously you couldn't include everyone, all the way down to Bandit number 3. Just started with brainstorming. Mord and Daggerface were both nearly party wipes, so they were a no-brainer. Beta was a similarly scary fight, and they failed to kill him, so another good one. Plus, Krill wasn't around for that one, so all Beta's asshole moves would be a surprise for him, while also being, I remember that, for the others. And while they didn't remember much, the Fey Fell thing, probably the weakest choice, at the end of Ginneron was also an utterly desperate battle, with PCs and NPCs dropping and being healed back to their feet left and right. After that, I wanted to start easy with the wolves, which had been a big personal threat for Krillidin, largely because they did not attack, just waiting for him to fall asleep, and the lumberjack, which was a stat block I never got to use. I knew I wasn't going to reuse the death fins from Al's realm, because they just fought those, and in the attrition math, one of them would either have to be the boss, or would take the place of way too many other opponents. And I threw in the Headless Horseman because that's part of Al's vibe. And also, it never got a fair shake since it had been forced to 1v6 the party. Does that leave out some fun ones? Sure. Like, Wormy is a fun voice and did some damage. Todd wouldn't work in a small room. The Dragonborn Death Knight? That was more interesting for lore character reasons than as a fight, really. I'm sure you could name some others, or argue about whether they could or should be the boss. Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin also asked,
How aware was the rest of the base to what was happening in the room?
Weird stuff happening in the lab was expected, and with Black and Draven present, they weren't going to be concerned until the explosion when the Black Cloud showed up. That would have been heard elsewhere, and probably some of the other fighting, but with combat rounds being theoretically 6 seconds long, it takes time for anyone to stop what they were doing and start to respond to something nobody was expecting. But yes, some people are aware, so somebody's got to be organizing a response. Mindsword asked,
How are the rest of the Midgard family taking Andrew's relatively sudden joining of the hand? He was basically conscripted after all.
And Drew was always a bit of a problem child, even as an adult. His father, Count Midgard, was a little hesitant at first, but ultimately decided it's quite a good thing for his wayward son. Learning some discipline and how to work within a group could only make him a better Baron of Cobbletown in the long run. Maybe in a couple years he could take over from his overworked steward. And he's working in labs deep within the headquarters of an order devoted to protection. It's not like they're sending him on field missions. And the Count demanded some assurances from Matsomi on that front, just to make sure. This Extras is a little late because there was a lot of animation in the finale, and it got so close I just needed to finish it. The next Extras will probably also be late because of the million things I have to do. See the State of the Channel 2022 video, so bear with me there. However, December 2nd, 2022 will be the 10th anniversary of the first episode of Tales from My D&D campaign, and in honor of that occasion, my sister Orestria, voice of most female characters in a show other than Angel and Mora, went to a huge amount of effort to collect nominations from patrons, votes from viewers, and to make a bloody award show to celebrate audience favorite scenes, characters, etc. from TDDC. I told her she didn't have to, but she did all that for me and for you, and the least you guys can do is to watch it. So that's coming out Friday, December 2nd. Whereas my own stupid plan to celebrate 10 years of TDDC is to watch the whole thing with you. Saturday and Sunday, 15 hours a day. I'm going to stream myself watching the entire series, probably from 9 a.m. to midnight Eastern time, because that's the sleep schedule I'm most likely to be able to stick to. There's no way I'll be able to talk the entire time, but I will talk a lot, and my chair will cover for me during the many bathroom and snack breaks. But I'm going to try to do the thing, damn it. So that will be December 3rd and 4th. Of course, the reason I was able to complete this project at all, and not just burn out from programming all day and then trying to make videos in my spare time, is because of support from my relentless Patreon patrons, and especially
Aether Mordu, Alberio, Oust, Aurelius, Bedamir, Brethren, Bessie, Critical Hit 20, Carnlin, Fright Knight, Dimmin, Earl of Sanguine, Darkwood, Eckhard Thalion, Fey Crossroads, Frostnap, Fireborn, General M.O., Gator Island, Nine, Hakoon, Gorefiend, John, Lieutenant Red, Lonito, Lord Aben, Malison, Desh, God, there's so many of them, Matt the Mage, MG3D, Mars Project, Norgren, OI1, Olden Man, Overlord Thor, Pedro Gavruni, Pontus, Prism Cat, Ramar Ulfist, Quackers, Draugr, Repmok, Stan the Man, Skyter 97, Starfall, Cygax, Torshiro 7, Tambu and June, Valis, Volkfang, Dragonloot, WA Soul, Warsword, Zombie, and Woodley, the members of the organization.